So our final speaker is Dr. Schenita Randolph. Schenita is an assistant professor in the School of Nursing at Duke. She is credentialed as a certified nurse educator by the National League of Nursing. She received her master's degree in public health from UNC Chapel Hill and doctorate in public health from Walden University. Dr. Randolph's program of research is aimed at development of culturally and socially appropriate interventions that will decrease the incidence of HIV among African American males. Currently, her research focuses on the role of African American fathers as sexual health educators for their pre-adolescent and adolescent sons. So today she will present her recent work on the perspectives of African American fathers about father-son sexual health communication, facilitators, and barriers.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So thank you for the opportunity to present my research to you today. I do have my notes. You know, researchers, we love to talk about our research. So in my study, the purpose of this study was to look at the role and the impact of African American fathers, specifically exploring the facilitators and the barriers of sexual health communication for them. We know that African American males between the ages of 13 to 29 are disproportionately affected by STDs and HIV, accounting for about 50% of the HIV infections among all youth. Parent-youth sexual health communication leads to positive sexual health outcomes. So research has found that parents who communicate with their adolescents about sex the children end up having higher rates of sexual abstinence, condom use, their intent to delay their initiation of intercourse is higher. However, this research mainly focuses on mothers and daughters, a lot of it, and even fewer research looks at the African American paternal influence of sexual health communication. We also know that fathers in other ways, such as their children with their education levels, children in terms of crime activities, fathers that are involved in their children's lives end up having a larger and a more positive impact. To date, we have one CDC-approved adolescent sexual health intervention called the Real Men study. In this particular intervention, their focus was on 11 to 14-year-old adolescent boys to promote sexual intercourse. There were 240 fathers enrolled in this intervention, which lasted for 7 weeks. However, the sons participated in the last week of that intervention. So in our study, looking at the facilitators and the barriers of sexual health communication for fathers, we actually, after IRB approval, had 29 African American biological fathers who had sons between the ages of 10 and 15. We recruited these fathers from 5 of 10 barbershops, which were approached in metropolitan and rural North Carolina communities, and more specifically, these were towards Guilford County and Mecklenburg County for this particular study. We chose the age group between 10 and 15 mainly because researchers agree that pre-adolescence is the best time to communicate about sex before the children become sexually active. We chose barbershops as our form of recruitment because it is a safe place, a trusted environment for African American men in terms of research recruitment as well as outreach. Our inclusion criteria you had to be African American or Black, a biological father, stepfather, father who adopted a son between the ages of 10 and 15, 18 and older. And informed consent was obtained before the fathers participated in the focus groups, and we also gave $50 incentives for their participation. You will see that all of our fathers were biological. 62% of them lived with their sons, so they were residential fathers, and the range aged from 20 to 49. Our sample was educated, with most of them receiving high school degree or higher, and 69% were married. So in this study, we conducted focus groups, again, with 29 fathers. The thought was that having focus groups would give them the opportunity to participate in a safe environment and have conversations with other men around sex. We had about 4 to 6 participants in each group. Again, I told you where the groups were conducted. The researchers developed a semi-structured interview guide, which was pretty much based on the literature around sexual health communication. Some of the example questions that we asked were, when do you talk to your son about sex? How do your own personal experiences impact your communication with your sons about sex? And tell us a time when you talked to your son about sex and what led to that conversation. These focus groups lasted for about 2 hours. In addition to that, we had the men to complete 2 questionnaires, one about self-efficacy. This was a 17-item scale in which we wanted to measure their confidence level in talking to their sons about sex. And a sample question from that questionnaire is, I can always explain to my son that he should use condoms if he decides to have sexual intercourse. And we also wanted to test their knowledge of STDs specifically. And so this was a 27-item questionnaire which measured their knowledge about sexually transmitted diseases and infection. The range for the self-efficacy scale ranged from 17 to 119, with higher scores indicating greater parent self-efficacy. You see that the mean score from our fathers was 105. Sexually transmitted disease knowledge, this score ranges from 0 to 52, with higher scores indicating more knowledge of STDs. And you will see that the mean score for that was 15.62. So our fathers were on the side of being confident about having that conversation. There was some lack of knowledge around STDs specifically for the adolescent male population. So in terms of the facilitators of communication, fathers in our study definitely embraced fatherhood and their role and their responsibilities as fathers. Some of the research talks about some of the limitations as far as including African American or Black men in sexual health studies is some of the assumptions that may exist that fathers are not engaged in their children's lives, particularly non-residential fathers. However, we had non-residential as well as residential. As you saw, most of them were in the home, but they all embraced their role as a father, and they thought that they kept it real, or they were straightforward with their sons about having this conversation about sex. The quality of the father-son relationship was also a facilitator of sexual health communication, in that fathers believed that it was important to have a relationship with their son, and to have that relationship was important if they were going to have sensitive conversations such as sex. Fathers' understanding of the son's developmental readiness. Fathers were pretty much aware that there were different developmental stages and different conversations to have with their sons. One being at the toddler age when you're talking about body parts, and the other being at the age of 10, when it's probably more important when they recognize that there were cues to their son's sexual interest. Some of the barriers, again, was some of the knowledge around, not necessarily specifically for the population, understanding the impact that this population had in terms of STIs and HIV was a knowledge barrier for them. I think most of the men in our study recognized it for older adults, but did not stop and think about the impact that it was having on adolescents. Fathers had difficulty initiating sexual health conversations with their sons, and approaching their sons was a major factor. Whenever the conversation would arise around sex, fathers felt confident. They felt like they were able to talk to their sons straightforward, but it was the problem of actually initiating and approaching their sons about this conversation. Another barrier is that fathers did not have a role model. They did not talk to their fathers about sex. So therefore, they did not know how to imitate this conversation and what that conversation looks like. For non-residential fathers living outside of the home, some of the barriers were disagreements about talks with their sons. mainly that the mother and the father were not on the same page as to how to go about having those conversations. Making sexual health a family priority. Fathers reported that there were other things that were important outside of sexual health when it comes to raising their children. And so that was a big barrier as well as making sexual health a priority, taking into consideration the external barriers and other things that they were dealing with on a daily basis. So some of the quotes that I wanted to pull out from this, one father, in reference to talking about father-son relationship, but basically having that relationship, because you don't want them to think you're there with a ball and chain, but just being able to talk to them, to make sure that you distinguish between a friend and your father. I'm your friend, but I'm your daddy. Another quote from a father states, I be trying to keep it real with him, talk to him like I would anybody else. I try to keep him smart. I don't want him going into life blind, have people sugarcoat stuff. So this reflects, again, the role and the responsibilities that fathers perceive that they had in being the sexual health educator. And my biggest hindrance is, did you do this with your dad? And I keep trying to explain to him, dude, my father was gone before I was a latchkey kid in kindergarten. You need to understand that this is new to me. I don't have a handbook for this. So when I'm talking to you, I'm frustrated a lot. You think I'm mad, I'm upset. I'm not. I have the weight of the world on my shoulders out here. So this refers to the father not having the opportunity to speak with his dad, but definitely having the desire to champion this with their sons. And it also speaks to other external factors that need to be considered when talking about father-son sexual health communication. I wish it was easier. They're not going to bring it to us. I wish they would. It's like you're in the major leagues and you hope somebody is going to throw you an underhand pitch. It's not going to happen. So again, fathers want their sons to approach them with the conversations. This crazy picture that I found here looks at the role of technology and the use of technology. Fathers had different, because we did ask about how you the role of technology for communicating with your sons for a future intervention. And fathers thought that technology was important, that there were different views, however, that they didn't want to use technology alone, that they did feel that there was a face-to-face component that was important so that their sons could hear the experiences of that communication. And fathers also felt like if they were to talk to their sons, that they would go too deep into that conversation and possibly run their sons away from coming back to talk with them again if they were to really openly share. So our findings were consistent with that of other father-son sexual health communication. However, we were able to reveal some of the complexities specific to African American fathers and their sons based on their perspectives. Fathers in our focus groups embrace their role and their responsibility. Unlike some studies who reported that fathers thought that it was unnatural for males to have conversations with other males, this was not a barrier for the fathers in our study. They did believe that they were the parent of choice compared to mothers that should have this conversation, although they did recognize and acknowledge the influence of mothers. Prior studies also reveal that fathers experience discomfort when talking with their children about sex, and that they fail to discuss condoms as a means of preventing sexually transmitted infections. However, in our study, fathers did not reveal that they were necessarily uncomfortable with having the conversation when the conversation did come about. It was they were uncomfortable with approaching their children. But when they did have the conversation, they stated that they kept it real with them and they explained the consequences of having sex. Fathers also talked a lot about condom use with their children. Future research. Future studies should explore this father-son relationship a little bit more in depth for African American or Black fathers and their sons about the sexual health outcomes. More specifically, what are the components in a close father-son relationship that may influence the father and son's trust? What happens after the talk? Does the father-son relationship have an impact on follow-through? So again, gaining a deeper understanding of this father-son relationship, as well as some of the generational gaps that are taking place for fathers, warrants further investigation. Father studies should also link the father's perception of the communication with the children's age, and that was one of the limitations, that we did not link the fathers with their son's age. So we know that the fathers had children between 10 to 15, but we were not able to identify, was this father had a son that was 10. So developmentally appropriate interventions are important. So being able to have those conversations with the pre-adolescents based on, should the intervention be different for a 10-year-old versus a 15-year-old, and how do those developmental needs change over time. Future research should also explore father-son dyad perspectives of sexual health communication, also including the when, the where, and the how, and the extent of communication that takes place. So this dyadic approach would eliminate factors and processes that would guide developmentally appropriate interventions for fathers and sons. Also including technology. As stated before, there are interventions that are more face-to-face in their delivery, 7 weeks, 8 weeks over time. And that was one of the limitations of the Real Men study. So future studies could also expand the Real Men, or either create other interventions that are technology-based. We have not, according to the literature, kept up with the culture of youth when it comes to technology-based interventions that are focused on their health. So actually including that would be beneficial. But before doing that, we need to explore the benefits of technology use, specifically for African American fathers and sons, to ensure that they will use the technology for intervention where developed. Some of the limitations, I spoke about some of these earlier. Again, we did not separate residential from non-residential fathers. Our study was specific to specific geographical population, so may not be generalizable to other populations as well. And in conclusion, we found that African American fathers have a great desire to lead in educating their pre-adolescent and adolescent sons about sexual health risks. However, they do need strategies on how to approach their sons and engage in this conversation. It is imperative that as practitioners and that as researchers that we understand the perspectives of African American fathers in order to have a clearer picture of the nuances of communication between them and their sons. Our findings have important implications for father-focused prevention interventions that will support African American fathers in their pre-adolescent and sons' lives. This study was funded by NC Tracks. I want to give that acknowledgement. Co-investigators, Dr. Tanya Coakley, Master's in Social Work Program and Ph.D. from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, as well as Dr. Jeffrey Shears from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. So thank you very much again for the opportunity, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them.